You are now listening to Carlie's Couch.
I'm Carlie.
And I'm Lex.
In this podcast, we discuss a wide array of topics about life and how to live your best life.
Whatever that looks like for you.
Hope y'all enjoy. This week on Carlie's Couch, we discuss the importance of confrontation, and if you're not good at it, how to get better.
Because you do need to be good at confrontation. I'm sorry. I learned this myself. Happy Monday. Welcome to the couch.
It is that you're tuning into us.
Yeah, so last week we talked about what we talked about last week?
Oh man, why did I just draw a blank? We talked about mental workload.
Yes, we talked about mental workload with relationships, right?
Yes.
So we was kind of getting into how you got to speak up for yourself and the like. So this week we're talking about that, like, you know, you have to have confrontation to move forward in most things. So that's what we're talking about today.
And we don't have a question from the couch this week, so we going right into confrontation.
That's good. I kind of like that. Confrontation is not being good at confronting people. I don't think is something that comes without practice. And I know that I grew up in a type of household where it's like, for parents, like if I say something, you doing that, and I was like, yes, ma'am. Like, okay, cool. And so I never had much practice trying to speak up for myself towards like any authority type figure in that way. And therefore I feel that I grew up always feeling like, okay, it's just best to like be quiet or keep it to yourself, or, you know, maybe I would challenge somebody like another kid or something. But like in general, I never felt comfortable with expressing, you know, any like a need or desire or a thought that would be like opposing to, you know, the other person that didn't feel comfortable. I'd rather just like keep the peace and like whatever. Even if I snuck around or whatever, like, right? Like that's what happens with kids. Is that, I don't want to have confrontation. I don't want to ask you, can I go to something? But I might just be like, yeah, I'm going to go do my homework and then go sneak out. And
see, I laugh because it's always like, you know, our parents and the way we were raised, it affects so much.
Everything. It's crazy. And once you realize, you be like, oh, I get it.
And so I know like confrontation isn't something natural. Nobody is born with those skills, I do not believe. And depending on how you were raised, you know, so it could be, you know, where you're scared to speak up about something, you might get in trouble. It might be like, you know, shut up, nobody asked you for this. So you just might not feel like you have a voice or have a place. And if you do, you might get in trouble. But also I think if you grow up around volatile confrontation and arguments and deviant people who don't know how to express their emotions in a healthy way, that could also be another reason why you don't know how to. Yeah, so I have the opposite.
Because now I know, I could think about somebody too. I know the reason, like, they didn't even like if I brought something up to them, and I'd be peaceful about it. But it's like, man, in my house, it was always da 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 da. So they want to escape that.
Yeah.
And you want to avoid it. It all still comes down to, like, you want to avoid
Well,
whatever,
I was
right?
about to say either avoid or like you go too hard. And so you just learn to not speak up, because if so, you're going to go too hard and it's going to become a problem.
You will go too hard? Like,
yeah, so
you don't have a middle ground.
Yeah, I was about to say, I didn't have a middle ground. So I would either not say anything to keep the peace and not necessarily not stir the pot, but to like, yeah, just so it wouldn't be chaotic. But if I'm going to go there, I'm going to go. And it was like, when I like started learning confrontation, I didn't have an in between. It was either I'm 100 or I'm 0.
Ain't no J. Cole over here.
Ain't no between. I'm not apologizing for shit. Like, you know, and so, yeah, so yeah. I think
that's also, I feel like how a lot of people who are kind of like, I don't suppress maybe, are like, if you do blow up, it's going to be crazy. But that's also because it starts to boiled up too much. Yeah.
Like it exploding. I think people like, oh man, I got to bottle everything up. All those people who feel like they can't express their emotions. That's why whenever they do, it becomes an issue. Mm-hmm.
Yes. But confrontation is necessary because this is how you have to keep it real about things. Like, hey, I don't like this. Or, hey, when you do this, I feel like X. Like, again, it doesn't even have to be that it's about to tear everybody's world upside down. But we have to be okay expressing what's bothering us, and we have to be okay receiving that, because that's also a tough thing too. Like when people come at us with the issue, you know, us getting defensive or us being like, well, let's not talk about that right now, you know, and just like not confronting things. Like when you don't confront things, they just build and build and build. And you don't even realize it, I think, until you move through some of those things.
I was about to say, yeah, I think many a relationship and friendship has probably ended because people were not speaking up when things were small. And by the time you got to the place where you were speaking up, it's because you exploded. And then it was like irreparable damage that happens. And also like that happens with ourselves too. So, yeah. And I'm just laughing because I'm like, man, I can think about places when I didn't speak up in relationships. And then by then I was just done. I was over it completely.
Yeah.
Like, don't even want to talk about this no more.
Yeah. So then how do you know when you need to speak up about something?
That's a great, that's a really good question. I don't have a foolproof answer, but I would say for me, what I use now is like, okay, am I bothered? Yes. Okay. How do I feel? Okay. And then I do a deep dive with myself.
Sorry,
She just want to touch my titty.
There's another one too I want to get.
Dang. Is it? I'm shedding like crazy today. But I think whenever I'm bothered, I do an introspection. Okay, cool. Am I sleepy? Am I angry? Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I overreacting? Am I projecting?
Is your mental workload
yes,
crazy?
Is my mental workload? Did I have a long
irritated?
day and then that person looked at me and now I got an attitude? Versus like, okay, no, this is something and it feels valid. And after I've sat with it, I still want to say something. So I usually use like a point to reflect with myself and to sit with myself, and instead of just always saying things, because I feel like I get bothered a lot more than it is an actual reason to speak up. Meaning like I could be, my mental workload is at capacity. I could be having whatever's going on, but I want to make sure that I'm not projecting whenever I do actually bring something up to a person.
Okay. So when you're going to speak up and confront somebody about something, you've assessed that this is actually something I really need to talk about.
I've sat with myself. I've pondered it. I have possibly even discussed it with my friend or a therapist. I've maybe journaled about it. And then, so anytime I say something, like it's not just off the, I would say 1% of the time it's off the cuff, but most of the time it's really well thought out.
Yeah, I think same, because I'll know like what my points are. I'll know what's making me upset. When you know the person, you even know kind of how they're going to maybe approach it, which it might not be good to assume that stuff, but that is one thing. And anytime I get into an argument or something, I'm like, you can never be mad. Like I'm thought through. Like it has been thought through. I would say another thing that determines if we need to confront somebody is just what the relationship is. There's some times where it's like, yes, something might have hurt your feelings or you didn't like it, but also I don't know you. I'm not gonna see you again. I don't have to let this bother me type vibe. And that happens sometimes. Well, this might be real small, but like when I'm, if I'm out running or something, like the other day, and a guy on a bike, I was in the middle of the thing. Cause also I got to remember to put myself in other people's shoes. But like it was a guy on a bike, and I'm like, you could just went around. But he was like, hey, it's a bike lane. And I was answering something. I'm like, you don't know what text I had just got from a family member. You know what I mean? And then I'm like, dang, why are you so upset? And I wanted to start calling him names and stuff, but I was like, all right. But also, I'll be that same person, though, if I'm running and then it's a group of 4 white people walking all across the line, it's like, do y'all think I'm about to get off the path? Because I'm not. Yeah, so also I'll be like, excuse me, and like whatever, and keep going. But those are things where it's like, none of that's necessary. We can move on. If it is a friendship or relationship or something that you notice is bothering you, or once you realize, a lot of times I feel like we could be bothered by something and then you don't quite realizing, you're like, this is what it is about this.
Yep.
And then once you realize that kind of like key thing, then it's like, now you start to notice it. You're starting to, in your mind, I got bullet points of examples now. And now let's talk about this because, hey, this is something that's bothering me. And I think that's very important. A, if it bothers you enough that you got a Dexter's laboratory and, plan it all out. And then B, if like you actually care about the relationship, or you want to be here and you don't want to be dealing with that feeling, so you need to express that. So whatever the relationship is really huge.
We talked about not letting the small things build up. And so if it's a relationship with someone that you care about, how do you know what small things to let slide versus what small things to actually say something about?
I think that certain things slide until I notice it again and again. And then it's like, oh, I need to bring this up because now I'm just going to have whole contempt or resentments. That being said, though, like you might let something kind of slide because of the timing, like one time I tried to start an argument. I didn't start an argument, but like he hated it, but I understand why. I got invited to go to a soccer game. We were going to the soccer game. But now was not the time for me to talk about how, you'll never come up with nothing because you just came up with this game, right? So it's like, the timing could have been different on that. Because now he felt some kind of way. And I'm like, oh, I get it. And yet what I'm saying is very much still fucking valid. Yeah, very valid. But now it was not the day. So like the timing of stuff too.
Another thing on timing, because if I'm riled up, most likely I'm not going to like, because if
your voice not going to come out crisp.
Yeah, because one, like they're going to dismiss it for you being angry, you being drunk, you being whatever, tipsy, high, whatever. They might dismiss it. So anytime I feel like I'm going to get dismissed, I don't do it in that moment. Also, like I feel like if I'm on 10 and I maybe need to be on 3, I let myself calm down before, because otherwise it's just going to be like, instead of like, nah, I need you to hear me out. Because some people just shut down whenever you're elevated.
Do. Yeah.
And that's even more annoying.
But I kind of feel annoyed too by the fact that it's like, why do I have to do all this, for you to receive? Facts. And it's like, all right, like I have to be like, I feel like, and then that time on April 3rd when you had said, and it's like, I feel like I had to do all that work instead of you realizing like, bro, like you're not doing something right. So also sometimes that blows me too, because I'm like, I don't think you're doing the same amount of work as far as like you caring to approach things in that way either. So sometimes it doesn't feel fair. But I have been in relationships and friendships or whatever, where if we had to talk about something, it was hey, I kind of want to talk about something. And then, of course, that makes you be like, oh, no, like, what is this? But then it's good to just listen and then be like, you know what? Okay, cool. And when this has happened and I felt like this was good because we both were like, all right, here's our next steps. I'm going to work on this. You can do this. And it's like, okay, cool. Then they didn't do nothing that they said. So it was like, all right, bye. But there is something to that, because it's like, I'd rather get to us not being cool instead of us being like hurt and not liking each other for years and just things, bumbling along. Like, it's so much better to just get people out of the way and to have people in your space and in your life that you can connect with in that way. So that confrontation is important, I think.
Would you say that you're good at confrontation now?
I think I'm great at confrontation once I do it. I definitely wait till I really feel like something needs to come up, though. I'm more likely going to blow up or talk big, and then they shut down or go away. But then they come back and tell me how they didn't like what I said, and now I'll be more like, well, this is actually what was going on. So that's not really a good thing, though, because I'll instead of like people hearing what I'm actually saying, it's like, oh, you're being mean or you're not respecting me, and it's like, yeah, I'm not, because I don't respect you, like period. At this point I don't care anymore, because like XYZ. But man, I've really tried. Like, even I've been in some romantic relationships where we did therapy together throughout, just because like whatever, and yeah, it's good to just bring things up and talk through them. But yeah, I'm probably not going to bring it up unless it's like I'm really fed up. Yeah.
Has it been a process getting you to even be in a space where you're comfortable bringing stuff up with people?
Yeah, I hate confrontation. 2020 was like my year of like realizing like, oh no, I have to like confront things, because at that point I was in a relationship with somebody who they really had a lot of issues with me, or they felt like I wasn't being fully open about stuff, or I was hiding stuff, and I'm like, like I'm not. But also it was just a weird situation. But I did realize from that, and I really did learn like, oh, like really being clear about things, being able to understand how people view things. Like we just view things so differently. And I came from a space where I like my secrets. I like things to myself. And so just because I didn't say, yeah, on April 15th, I did do X, Y, Z and went to Outback Steakhouse with this guy one time, and blah, blah, like I'm not doing all that. Cause also I'm like, oh, that didn't matter. Like, but they're like, no, you didn't, you acted like you never did, da, 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 da. I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I probably did go out to eat one time. Like, I'm not thinking about this. I'm not remembering this. I'm not trying to keep it from you, but like, yeah, it was very weird. And so from that though, I really learned like, okay, in future situations, immediately from there, just being way more like exactly what you need to say, saying it. And I recognized I would hold a lot of things back or in until they were brought up. So it's like, okay, well, I could do something different now. I can bring stuff up more quickly. I can be okay with saying difficult things. A lot of times that's what it is. Not even necessarily like a confrontation, but I had a lot of trouble saying things that I knew would be difficult for them to hear. And so I just kind of chill, but then they just felt like, you know, like, oh, I wasn't keeping it real. So I learned a lot, and I have definitely been way, way, way more open since then.
I feel like that's the hardest part of confrontation for me, is like saying things that might be difficult for them to hear, because I like care about their feelings and things. But what I recognize is in not saying those things, I'm caring more about their feelings than mine. And then I get upset about that. And so that's been a whole journey that I'm still on. Like, you know, once I have, you know, set with my issues and the things I'm upset about, is presenting it and being okay with them being upset or being hurt or being whatever. And you have to be okay with that. And that was hard for me, because it was like, you know, I don't want that. But what I recognize is I would much rather say that and hurt somebody's feelings than spend a lifetime of me being uncomfortable, because you have feelings. Like, I have feelings too, and they're upset. And that's why I'm saying this right now.
And then on the other side, though, it's like I kept hearing like, well, I wouldn't have been upset if we just were straight at the beginning. And I'm like, I get that, because maybe not. Now I don't really know if that's true or not, but I was able to practice that, and I did see that happen, where it's like, hey, XYZ, and then they're like, okay, or it's like, I don't know about that, and then from there you move on and you go quickly instead of all this back and forth, or it gets weird and all of that, right? So being okay with somebody being upset is kind of tough, because you don't want people to not like you, or you don't want people to think of you in some kind of way, and yet half the time people will better respect your straightforwardness and your honesty about something. The earlier you can bring something up, and before it turns into something bigger, I guess,
which is super important.
But yeah, I think confrontation and speaking up is the easiest way to move forward through and get closer to where you want to be, closer to who you are. And it's just one of those things, like, you have to be doing it to get that, because man, I can move so much more quickly through things, even with like work confrontations. Like I, was working with partners, or there's colleagues and people that's very hard to work with, and how do you deal with those things, and people that you have to see every day or work with or whatever. It's not easy, and yet once somebody like calls you and is like, hey, I didn't like how it seemed like you have attitude in calls or blah, 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 whatever, it's like, oh, first of all, I don't even know where you're getting this from, but at least it lets you know like what they are seeing, what they're thinking. Okay, what do we need to do? And like move through stuff. Otherwise, everybody just has an attitude, and you start to get those per my last emails and, stuff like that, and people getting passive aggressive, blah, blah, blah. It just makes the environment trash if you're not just putting things out there. So confront people.
And I think that confronting people or having these difficult conversations also gives an opportunity to improve relationships, because maybe they be like, I thought you had an attitude during calls, and you're like, hey, I actually had a really bad day. My uncle died. Whatever is going. It don't even have to be nothing crazy like that. But in that, then they can check their own biases about situations. But also now y'all both know that there is this direct line of communication, that if things are going, weird or whatever, that you can actually be vulnerable in that space with each other. It don't always have to be that deep, but I think that it's an opportunity in all kinds of relationships for growth and for things to run more smoothly.
Yes. So now when we do have to confront somebody or feel the need to, what are some things we should consider to make that smooth and successful?
I think the first thing is to always be respectful as best you can. And so making sure that your anger level and them, like, now might not be the best time for that conversation, but it still needs to be had. But when people are level-headed, and in that, being aware, like, you're not trying to win something. When we talk about confrontation, it's not like I'm trying to prove you wrong and me right and me win and you lose. Because nobody wins when that happens.
Though when I'm like, hey, this is happening, and they're just like, okay. Like if there's never any like, dang man, you're right, I'm sorry,
no resolution.
Yeah, I'll be like, all right, but that's where it's on you to also be like, bet, keep it moving.
Yeah,
so or pay attention to how people. This is another point. Paying attention to how people respond. When you do bring up something, like, do they just shy away or do they disappear? Sometimes people remove themselves, like.
And I think something in that is like thinking about what you're looking for when you're having this conversation. And depending on the relationship, you can also voice that. Like, hey, you did this, and it would really mean a lot to me if you did this moving forward. Or this is a way we can mitigate this situation. Or I really just want you to apologize and recognize what you're doing. And being able to communicate that. And also being okay with the fact that they don't have to do it just because you are direct and because you are having this difficult conversation. But at least at the end of the day, you spoke up for yourself. You asked for what you needed, and you put it out there.
That's good. Maybe that is something you can say too. Is like you tell somebody, hey, I really just want you to be able to take a moment and see this from my point of view, and like, I just want to feel like you understand what I'm saying. Because I really did, even after that crazy 2020 where like it was just like, man, am I this evil person? Like since then, in dating and in other relationships, I could talk and they'd be like, yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, you're right. And I'd be like, oh, snap. Like, meanwhile, I'm like, damn, well, there goes the rest of my bullet points. Like, now I don't need to do all that. And so I was like, wow, I remember that being so refreshing. And I don't remember ever experiencing that really before. And it's like, wow, that's awesome. I can say how I feel. I feel safe to speak up. And then once you speak up one too many times, now you're doing too much. So it's like, all right. So that's where, going back to where we said before, it's like, you don't got to bring up everything, but understanding like what those important things are and being able to voice those through like how you feel. We've talked about this a million times, but like coming at them like, I feel like this, or, you know, this makes me feel like whatever, right? And not, the more you kind of blame somebody or make them feel bad, the less they're going to be able to really receive what you're talking about, which is fair. And like, that's anytime somebody's criticizing or saying something about me, like I'm immediately like, nope, like, no, if you don't do it the right way, now we got to talk about it. So,
but even with that, so I definitely had a conversation, like, you know, when you did this, I felt like this and all this, but they did not know that was a technique to try not to blame them. And anyways, person took it mad personal and was like, oh, you was trying to manipulate me, all these things. And I'm like, bro, that's not what that is not what was happening in this conversation. But all of that to say, like, that took a few difficult conversations to get to, because we all come from such different backgrounds and have different perspectives. And in my head, I was like, bro, this shit is straight from a therapy. Like, what do you mean? I have bullet point. I have this. Like, what are you talking about?
That's a good point too, because that doesn't always just because you lay it out in a way that you feel is respectful or that you feel is thought out does not mean it's going to be received in that way. Nope. And sometimes it is like, I just know how to say something in a way, and maybe I could still be wrong. Like, that's when it's frustrating, and that's when it's kind of like, man, I can't really have certain types of discussions with this person because it feels like no matter what you say, we're about to be arguing or we're not going to get to a resolution or whatever. But I will say another thing to consider when confrontation arises is, okay, what is a good resolution where that could be a win-win? Especially if somebody else is coming to you and they're saying, you know, something's going on. Like, are you willing to listen? Are you willing to come away with the next step? Are they willing to come away with some next steps? Even if it's just small at a time. Sometimes it's just like, I just want you to hear me. Then it might be, all right, now. So, and that's happened before where I might have had an issue that was brought up. And then now when it happens and I have an example like, hey, so for example, remember we talked about XYZ. This right here this is an example. Like, so this makes me feel like whatever. And it's like, oh, okay. Because people don't really know. Or to them, that's not an important thing to them or something in a way they think or whatever. So being able to guide in that way is helpful. And you being able to respond well to that type of guidance as well. And
I think it's a fine line between like keeping things and throwing it in somebody's face versus using it as an example. Because you could be like, well, this time you did that and then this and then that. That's different than using things as an example. And so like, you know, treading a line and also recognizing who you're talking to, but just knowing that could be a thing too. Because I remember I brought something up and the person asked for an example and I was like, you know, I don't write stuff down. Like, I don't want to throw it in your face. And they're like, but I really want to understand what you mean. And so to your point, then it came back later and I was like, yo, this is exactly what I was talking about. Oh, okay, cool. But like not like keeping a whole
and somebody like phone. Me, that's what I was saying. I'll have the note on my phone, but I don't like that either because
like it.
I'll be like, bet, I'm gonna monitor, you know, XYZ this week so I can kind of put the notes down how I feel. But it's like you look at all that later, then it's and really you just look at like, man, why am I here? Like, why am I here? That or it's like, well, I don't want to be like and bring up the road next time we chat, but sometimes it does take like you do need to have examples, right? And we know how certain people are. There's some people who if you don't have nothing concrete, because sometimes like you like, yo, I don't like when XYZ, and if you don't have an example, then they're gonna invalidate, or people are gonna look for a way to invalidate what you're saying. So knowing who and what you're dealing with, like, I don't know, maybe you do need to have your list, but that's where things get complicated. It's like if we got to do all that, then. Yeah. But I know I focus on just taking responsibility for my communication in general, right? And I have very much put a lot more effort into being clearer with people, to being transparent with people, bringing things up, hearing them, giving them opportunity to work through whatever it is, them giving me opportunity to work through. Because one thing about me is I'm very effort based. And so going back now to the last week's episode, like this is where somebody loses me, because they might say, I might hear Lex on me or, stuff going on with me. And it's like, okay, bet. Like I'm bringing things up, like you said, to a therapist. I have started a medication. I am doing more of this or that. Like I'm going to do things. If I care about a relationship, I'm going to do the things. And so now it's like, okay, I'm doing these things. And sometimes people are still just like, oh, it's just, they still have a problem or nothing's changing. And so it might not even, just be on the one person. And sometimes it, as a group effort, it's like, oh, actually, like you brought something up and I've been doing X, Y, Z, but now what's going on your side? So I know I take responsibility for myself and I do my part. And I think kind of at the end of the day, that's all I can think about. But if I have not been clear with somebody or if I have not been straightforward, then, you have to recognize that that's on you.
Why? So we talked about why confrontation might be hard, but why are people conflict averse or confrontation averse? Like, why do they not?
Why do they avoid it?
Yeah. Why are we afraid of conflict?
Because we don't want people to abandon us, or we don't want to be by ourselves, or we don't want to feel our egos are big and we don't want to feel like we're the reason people are mad at something. We want to line up with the ideas we have of ourselves, and we want them to think I'm some great, amazing person. And if you don't, like, oh my God, like, oh no, you have a problem with me or with something. Like, no, we don't like those feelings. So, yeah, we don't, not wanting to be too needy, not wanting to hurt somebody else's feelings. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why we're conflict averse. And then for you as listeners, then you're just kind of thinking about like, what are those things for you? And like, what's stopping you? So maybe even like next time you get a little upset at something, it's like, then why do I not want to say something right now? And then think about that for yourself, I guess. I'm sure, and there's a million different situations.
Yeah, but I think that that's a good exercise, is to really sit with, maybe why you don't speak up as much as you want to, or why you don't confront things. And I think it's like a practice, right? Like that's one way to get better, is first to understand why we don't, right? I think it's huge. But then also to practice speaking up whenever you do feel bothered and whenever you do feel that the situation warrants it. Like, you're worth that. Your relationships are worth that.
And even if sometimes the practice too is like keeping it short and concise and not blowing up. So maybe being like, when you don't open the door for me, I kind of, I don't feel whatever, or, just say that and just keep it moving or whatever. Right. And sometimes it doesn't take a whole lot, like, cause especially if it's something simple that they could be doing, like, then sometimes you'll notice like, oh, they'll actually think about it more or think about it differently, or dang, I feel like you didn't really care because you didn't, grab this grocery bag out of my hands and kind of let me do the extra work. But, I like to have that help from you. And then there's ways, again, this goes back to where how somebody could turn this and be like, you're manipulating me. But like, if you can really think about things from a loving way and how you can really tell somebody something, not the only reason maybe, but one of the main reasons we confront is because we do care about this relationship, this friendship, this whatever it is. And so we confront each other because we want this to be a good and healthy thing. So I think maybe most importantly is just having confrontation with people who are in that same space, who also care enough about whatever that relationship is.
Yeah, and also recognizing that if you don't, confront things, if you don't speak up for yourself, then you're always prioritizing other people's feelings and wants and needs over your own. And so I would say confrontation is a great way to practice advocating for yourself, asking for what you want, telling people how things made you feel, even if it's uncomfortable.
One thing that's also really annoying sometimes, and which is funny because I'm on both sides. Like, I come from not communicating anything and just holding everything in. And yet also, as I communicate more, it's really annoying when you can tell somebody else also has an issue, but they not really saying it, or they just kind of shrink, and it's just like, hey, like, you know, you could say something, and then I'm gonna get attitudes like, man, speak up. Like, that's what
Say it
happened to
with
me.
your
I'd be like,
chest.
speak fuck up. Yeah, like, I know you mad. Like,
No, that's
and then it's just like shrink. And it's like, all right. And then 2 weeks later, they want to be like, hey, can we, man, I don't want to talk about this no more. Like, you could have spoke up. Like, speak up. Because now I feel, again, going back to mental workload, it's like, it's not my job to pull things out of you. It's not nobody's job to pull things out of you. And so we have to speak up for ourselves. Yeah, both ways, man. Just speak up, even if short, concise, respectfully, and see how you can move through situations by just acknowledging what you need, what you desire.
because life. I mean, I feel like that sucks to live a whole life and never really get what you want or what you need because you're too scared to speak up about it for whatever reason. So I hope y'all take some time this week to really think about what keeps you from confrontation, ways you might be able to get better, come out of a situation from love, considering the other person's feelings, considering your own first. Yeah, and hit us at Carlie's Couch. I would love to hear, you know, if you're really good at confrontation, if you have tips, if you're not, kind of what you took away from this and what you're practicing.
Yes, have a great confrontation-less week, unless you need to confront somebody.
Yes, and then do that. Bye, y'all.